My name's Joe. I'm definitely an alcoholic. Oh, man. That is one crazy little dude right there. Oh, I've had the opportunity to do this a number of times, and is that okay there? And one of my greatest joys is that I get, to meet people and go to different places and see different things and establish relationships that last a lifetime. And I won't forget this one. Me and him are going to kidnap that little waitress yesterday and take her to Alabama. Anyway. Until that lady jumped in, didn't she? She had a chaperone. I always do this, because it's always entertaining to me, I guess, to some degree, that I love to sit and watch, and you all see the speakers, and we get the little badges and stuff, and you'll fumble through your itineraries, and you'll look, and you'll see that, and you'll say, Joe N. from Madison, Alabama. He looks Mexican. Joyce, have they got to Alabama already? Yeah. By way, I've been in Huntsville, Alabama since 1990, but I'm originally from Las Cruces, New Mexico. Not that that matters. We're going to get into all that stuff in just a minute, but I don't know that I can even do this talk here today because I am like freaking jacked up right now. I am just so jacked up. I mean, last night it started with Charlie, and then this morning with Pat, and then Pat after that, and then, and then Chris this afternoon, and then this little Olivia. I'm like, you know what? You don't need me, man. God, I'm like just pumped on Alcoholics Anonymous right now. So I'm so grateful for that. I love Alcoholics Anonymous with absolutely all of my heart, but I got to tell you, that it wasn't always that way. My sobriety date is March the 17th of 1987. So just a couple weeks ago, I celebrated my 28th anniversary in Alcoholics Anonymous. February 3rd, I turned 53 years old. So I've been sober longer than I was alive when I got sober. So if you kind of do that math, I was pretty young when I got sober. I didn't think so then, but I look at it now, and the life that I've been given has been so blessed, and it blows me away. But a few years ago, I don't know, I'd been sober for about 15 or 16 years at the time, and life on life's terms had gotten a little bit to be too much. I don't know if you know that. Look, if you're new here, it doesn't matter how long you're here. After a while, some days just don't feel good. And I was having one of those days, and I was having, the money was not as, I wasn't coming in fast enough, and the girls weren't acting right at the house, and, was that talking about the spaghetti last or today? My wife had spaghetti on her face or something, I don't know. And I wasn't feeling it. The spiritual realm of Alcoholics Anonymous and God weren't working anymore. And now, I don't know that I didn't say this with my mouth, but I think my actions did precede me. And what I was saying with my actions is that a drink looks pretty good right now. And I was 15 or 18, somewhere in that time, doesn't really matter. And I walked out of my house, and I was restless, irritable, and discontent. I walked out of my house, walking over to my truck, and there was a lady pulling a wagon, a little red wagon up the street. And in the back of that little wagon, or sitting in that little wagon, was a little boy. And this little boy had those little Oshkosh Bagosh overalls on, the little striped ones. You all know what I'm talking about. He had the little red hat, red hair, blue eyes, freckles. Oh my God. Norman Rockwell himself could not have painted this scene. He couldn't have painted this scene. And as I'm walking out to my truck, he's sitting and he's smiling and he's waving at me. And this little baby had Down syndrome. And I looked at that little boy, and at that moment in my life, I had never witnessed perfection like I had just seen it in the back of that wagon. My prayer today, because you see, society deems that boy as dysfunctional. Society describes him as handicapped. Not in my life. That little boy was perfect. He was perfectly placed in my life exactly at that moment, exactly at the time when I needed him to be. And I pray to God that God uses my alcoholism and my red wagon. Because if you're one of those people who just can't stop, I pray that he uses me to carry a message to you in all my dysfunction. And I promise you, you're going to see it here in just a minute. That you know, because the big book says in the doctor's opinion, those who seem doomed an alcoholic death become usefully and happily whole. Anyway, I got a book here that I follow because if I don't, those tapers don't like me. So anyway, let's get started. Now, I'm a little grateful today. Very, very, very. I'm just the most blessed human being I know. But it wasn't always that way. I remember my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was at the Arid Club in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and there were 4 people in that room. And when I walked in that room, the girl that was sitting at the desk chairing that meeting had like purple hair. Now, she was punk before Madonna was. This chick, I mean, we're talking early 80s. This chick, she had this weird clothes on, and she's sitting up there and she's saying, "My name's Selma and I'm an alcoholic. No, 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 no." And I'm looking at her and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this chick is freaking a fruitcake, man. I am nothing like that. And she says, and I just hope that, the other day I was walking down the aisle at the grocery store and there was these wine bottles and I just didn't think that I could make it through the wine section without having a drink. And I'm thinking, I am nothing like this girl. And she's got this purple hair, and she went on, and so the next person started talking. This lady was Jessie. And Jessie was this beautiful redhead, looked perfectly normal in every way. You got them in your own meetings. You know what I'm talking about, until they start talking. Then when they start talking, you start looking at them saying, oh my God, that chick is like a half bubble off level, man. And so Jessie starts talking. She says, and she was a piano instructor, and she says, and my kids, it's just, I don't know if I can make it to make it through their session without having to get up and go walk away and go have a drink and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, I am not like that. I am not like you people. They got the wrong guy. I'm here by accident. I listened to them talking about their alcohol problems, and I had absolutely nothing. I'm not like you people. Then the next guy started talking, big old tall farmer in overalls, had a dip in his mouth. He's sitting there, he says, I'm Ron, I'm an alcoholic, I know this, you just don't drink one day at a time, it gets better. Well, good for you. But that's not you don't understand. I don't have an alcohol problem. I have a judge problem. Like the judge is a little mad that I didn't show up for the last court date I was supposed to show up for. You don't understand. You guys have a drinking problem and you guys can't get through the aisle and all that other stuff. That's not my problem. I got a money problem. Like the dealer wants his money and I ain't got it. Then it goes to the next guy, and this guy's sitting in this big old puffy yellow kind of, one of those big futon kind of chairs, and this guy's got glasses, man. They're so thick, I can't even really believe you could see through them. And they're duct taped on both sides and in the middle, He's got hair that's like matted like a range dog. You could smell him from across the room. I'm like, my name's Bob, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm the last of the real hobos. And I'm looking at him, and I'm saying, now that's an alcoholic, people. Somebody help that man. Please help him. But you don't understand, I'm not like that guy. That guy needs to stop drinking, and he needs a life change that is different from me. I'm not like that. You see, what happened for me is that I felt like I had deep-rooted social and psychological issues. I thought that there were things that were wrong with me that weren't, you guys didn't drink and you got better. But I'm not like that. I've got deep-rooted social psychological issues that, well, I got this idea that God has a baby-making machine. See, and God has this big baby-making machine, and he sits here with this foot pedal. And these babies shoot on out. And as these babies shoot on out, he's got these little Oompa Loompa looking little characters. And these little Oompa Loompas have their little white overalls on, and they go up and they catch them. Oompa Doompa Doompa Dee Dee. And he walks over to a bassinet and he tucks the baby in there, wraps him up in his blanket, and he looks over at the other one, he says, he's ready. And the other one looks at him and says, I'll be right there. And he walks over. He walks over and he grabs a book off the stack that's sitting right behind him, and he comes over and he tucks this book in with that bassinet. Stork picks him up and takes him on his way. God shoots the button, baby Oompa catches him, puts him bassinet, book in, boom, gone. February 3rd, 1962. Baby shoots out. Oompa catches him, takes him to the bassinet, says he's ready for his book, and the other guy looks at him and says, we're out of books. It's out of books? What do you mean we're out of books? Don't tell God again. How could you be out of books? What do we do? Send him on his way. Send him on his way. And that's what they did. That stork came down, picked me up, and took me on my way. Now, this book is not your ordinary everyday book. You see, this is the book of life. This book has your address on it, where you're going to be dropped off at. You're going to be dropped off at 1234 Jones Street, Anytown, USA. It's got everything it teaches you how to handle mathematics. It teaches you how to deal with finances. It teaches you how to deal with emotions. It tells you you're going to be an engineer with 1.3 kids, a Chihuahua and a German Shepherd. Everything is in it. You're going to go to school at Alabama and play football. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the book of life. And if you're going to win a national championship, you have to go to Alabama. That's for Beth, because she tried to convert me early on. Anyway, that book of life, every single person gets one, and on February 3rd, they sent me on my way without one. And see, that little boy, every other baby that goes out there gets this book and knows exactly who he's supposed to be with and how he's supposed to do it. But I didn't get that. You know what they do with babies who don't get books? They drop them in villages of other people who didn't get books either. And they have no idea. They're winging it. And so they dropped me off at this little village. It's this little Mexican colony and somewhere in southern New Mexico. And these people, they have no idea. They're winging it at best. And so I'm growing up, and for some strange reason or another, I just always felt like I didn't fit in. My grandpa was a baseball player, and my grandpa was our baseball coach. And I remember that, I'm playing on his baseball team, and I'm the fat little roly-poly kid at the end of the bench that never got picked on any other team, and I'm on my grandpa's team, and he's like, oh my God, I gotta play this kid, man. It's the last inning, bases are loaded, we need one run to win and 2 outs, and Joe's gotta come back. I'm gonna strike out. I got a book. I don't know how to hit a baseball. Grandpa, I didn't get a book, man. And so what does my grandpa do? He reacts. Everything's a big reaction. God almighty, can't you just hit a ball, man? And I'm a failure. And everything I do seems to be a failure. I seem to be the laughingstock of everybody. I grew up Catholic. I was a little altar boy, and these two guys that were my mentors who had books, whose books said prankster because they were pulling pranks on me all the time. And they were telling me, okay, now it's time to ring the bells. Now, I don't know if some of you might be Catholic or not, but there's a certain time in the service that you're supposed to ring the bells. Well, these guys just felt like any time was a good time. Let's tell them to do it now. So there I am ringing the bell. I'm ringing these bells. The priest is looking down. No, not now. And this guy's directly off the boat from the Vatican. No, not now. Stop. I don't have a book, Father. I'm just ringing those bells, man. Go get the wine and the water. Go get the wine and the water. And I come back and I'm standing there like an idiot with the wine and the water. No, not now. Go back. I was a misfit. I was a square peg in a round hole. No matter what I did, I didn't fit in. And I'm talking about, 7, 8, 9 years old. I haven't had a drink yet, but for some reason or another, I felt like I didn't belong. I was restless, irritable, and discontent before I even knew what that was. Well, another thing that we did in this little village, and I grew up in this village of, I'm all jacked. I grew up in this village of hunters. One of the things that we grew up in this little Hispanic family of macho men. And these macho men, they're all talking about, they go out, they build a bonfire. There's going to be a big old party on Saturday for Joe, and we're going to have a keg, and we're going to tap that keg on Wednesday. So they tap the keg on Wednesday for my birthday party, who's 7 years old, on Saturday. And they build this bonfire. And what would always happen is that I noticed that as that beer got flowing, the fish got bigger. They always seemed to get bigger. And they always talked about the cars. Oh, man, you should see my car, man. It's bad. And the fish got bigger and the deer. Hey, Bobby, tell him the story about the deer, man. Tell him the story about the deer. So Bobby starts, I was sitting up on that rock, and there he was, that 18-pointer, 330-pound field-dressed monster. Getting ready to take my shot, and my gun jammed. Well, I'm sitting here, and I'm looking now. There's Cousin Bobby, and there's Leo, and there's Johnny, my grandpa, my dad, all my heroes. They're all right there. They're talking about all this great stuff. And I don't know because I don't have a book. I'm taking notes. This is how men become men. And so, what did you do, Bobby? What'd you do? My little heart's pounding. I can only hardly wait to see what Bobby's going to do next. Well, my gun jammed, so I jumped down on him and I stabbed him. Oh my God. I said, man, when I get big, I'm not going to just kill deer. I'm going to choke them. And I'm going to be the best deer choker. And I've got this idea that he who gets the most trophies wins. He who is bigger and badder at everything else he does in his life is the best there is. And that's, in my mind, that's what I thought. He who has the most wins at the end of the day. Somewhere around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning that same night, my dad would come home drunk. And I'm sitting in there in the other room, and I know my mom's been waiting up. And in you Al-Anons, there's a little term I coined a little while back. Maybe I didn't coin it, I heard it or something, but I'll take credit for it because we're that way. The sound that silence makes. Pat talked about it, that counting lights, counting headlights. That sound that silence makes when what Olivia talked about. That waiting for dad to come home, waiting and sitting in there and knowing my mom's just pacing up and down. And I'm sitting in the other room and I know what's going to happen. About 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, my dad shows up, and my mom's asking him, where have you been? Who were you with? What were you doing? Where's the money for the rent? And it's just this, and it just escalates and escalates, and it starts getting louder and louder, and the next thing you know, I hear the punches flying. I wake up the next morning and I see my mom, and she's got bruises and black eyes, and I'm looking at her and I'm thinking to myself, I don't have a book, but I know one thing for sure, man. I am never going to be like that dude. I am never going to be like my dad. When I get big, I'm going to be the best dad. I'm going to be the best hunter. I'm going to make more money than everybody else. I'm going to love my kids. And that was the other thing, is that if he wasn't loving on me, he was knocking me around all the time. Well, like I said, you have a tendency to, if you're a square peg in a round hole, things don't fit right. You don't feel right. And I was restless, irritable, and discontent. And what ended up happening was is that my cousin and I took a bunch of my grandpa's beer, and we went and he had a little cotton farm, and we went out into this cotton field, and we went out to that cotton field, and I remember we popped the top on that beer. Now, I don't necessarily, I know what we had for lunch yesterday, but for the most part, I don't usually think about that. But let me tell you about this. I remember that day in that cotton field. And that's what I think really makes a big difference. I remember that day as clear as this, as I'm standing here right now. I remember popping that top, and I remember pinching my nose, and I remember pouring that beer back, and I remember that, I don't know, that wasn't anything electric about it at first, and I don't know if I pinched my nose the second time, but then it was like, ah, ah. The clouds parted, and a light beam shone down on me. The Oompa Loompas found my book, baby. Mine just happened to come in a Schlitz malt liquor tall boy. And for the first time in my life, for the very first time in my life, I felt, and I can't emphasize this enough, I felt like I fit for the first time in my life. I'd never ever felt this way before. I'd never felt that I always knew that I felt like I was disconnected, but this time, for whatever reason, in that cotton field, that beer made me feel like I was part of. Now, the Big Book describes it as this. It says that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. To them, the sensation's so elusive that they cannot, and here's the deal, is that they cannot, after a time, differentiate the truth from the false. Restless, irritable, and discontent unless they can once again experience a sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. And I found ease and comfort in a cotton field with a malt liquor tall boy. It made me feel like everything looked. You see, I had this idea, my perception was altered in a way that made me feel like everything on the outside is that if I could only feel like I fit like you look. You see, I have this idea that you all function perfectly right here. You're all normal. You got books. You know who you're supposed to be with and how you're supposed to do it. You know exactly how to raise your kids. You know exactly how to love them. You know exactly how to do X, Y, Z. But you see, I'm not like that. I'm down here. So I have to perform at a level that's this much higher just so that you see me at the same level that you're at. And when I can't do that, when I can't perform at this level, I need false courage. And that false courage came for me in the form of ethyl alcohol. And when I drank, everything got normal. And I felt like I fit for the first time. And my perception, you know, you hear that saying all the time that perception is reality. And my perception became my reality. And so I perceived that he who has the most toys wins. And because I had to perform at a level that was this much higher than everybody else to see, so that you'd see me at the same level, was to do the best I could at everything I did. One of the things that I did is I played football. I played football all through high school, and I was one of those guys that was the go-to guy. Get in there, Joe. Offense, defense, kickoff return, punt return. It didn't matter what it was. I was on the field. A couple years ago, you all may remember when, what's that dude from Florida, Spikes? They caught him on film sticking his finger in the helmets, you know, and poking guys' eyes out and stuff. I think that's perfectly acceptable, man. I say if you can get your mouth around their ankle, bite hard. Whatever it takes to win, baby. You give it all you got. You know, it's got to be the best at all you can possibly be, and that's exactly what I did. And so I could walk around that school with my big old jacket and all my patches and badges and all these other things. You see, look at me, man. Who needs a damn book? I got my badges. Truth of the matter is, girls, why would you go out with me? If you knew that if I wasn't this external, if I wasn't a patch, if I wasn't this jacket, if I wasn't a football player, and you really knew where I came from, and you really saw what I was really like inside, you'd have nothing to do with me. So everything I lived about was to put up some trophy. And so I became this trophy gatherer. Well, I have a better way of showing you. So what happened, well, let me step back for just a second. What happens is that you start believing your own lies. You see, we can no longer differentiate the true from the false, is what that says. We drink because we like the effect. And then we can no longer differentiate the true from the false. And because I could no longer differentiate the true from the false, I start believing my lies. Now, Chris talked about selfishness and self-centeredness a while ago, and I just thought it was so beautiful the way she put it. You see, selfishness and self-centeredness are not derogatory terms, in my opinion. They're the ways we survive. And if you live down here, then you defend a lot. You live in a lot of fear a lot. You believe your own lies a lot. And so what you do is you try to get people to believe whatever you're saying or whatever you're trying to, blah, 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 blah. Well, let me just show you. I was sitting up on a rock when my gun jammed. So I jumped down on him and I choked him. Ethel, I didn't think they were real. No, it's real. Look, I killed it. The reason I brought this jackalope is because the mermaid wouldn't fit in the airplane. And don't tell me I ain't got a stuffed unicorn at home either, because I do. And don't tell me I didn't kill it, because I did. And I will defend my lies to the nth degree. Well, what ends up happening is because I defend those lies, and I played football, and I graduated from high school by the grace of God, and only by the grace of God. And really, not my sponsor said because we're sick, we're not stupid. I wasn't stupid. I'd take my coaches for my teachers, and they had to pass me to play. So that's the only reason I graduated. So I graduate from high school, and by this time I'm really starting to drink a lot. I'm really starting to find reasons to go out and party. I walked into a friend of mine picked me up and took me to a college party. We went to a fraternity party. I walked into that fraternity. We walked through this gate, and behind this gate was 100 kegs of beer. There was a big old giant beer truck with 100 kegs and girls in short shorts, tight tops. And I walked through that gate, and once again, I had found my place. I had walked through the pearly gates of that fraternity, and I joined that night, man. I mean, I absolutely joined in. I jumped in, I joined, and I said, I know I'm at home. A couple weeks later, they came to me and said, hey, you're one of us, you're one of our brothers and stuff, and we really want you here, but, you got to register for school. Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I was going to do that, but I just not really sure what I'm going to take. Well, school's been on now for 2 weeks, So I went home and conned my mom, and she got me in a couple of classes, and I wasn't there for the classes, obviously. I was there for the fraternity academic probation, the end of the first quarter, kicked out the next quarter. But because I'm a performer, I'm 110 on the freeway, or flat broke down on the side of the road. At that time, I was working in this little restaurant. And this restaurant promoted me to manager. Well, let me backtrack. A long time ago, when I first started doing a lot of talking, I used to talk about being promoted to manager. Years of recovery, the 12 steps, a number of fifth steps, and working this program, I got promoted to a key employee at a fast food restaurant that sold steak fingers. Not really a manager at a steakhouse. And I walked into this restaurant, and this manager's sitting talking to this little girl, and he's sitting talking to this little girl, and he says, she's starting tomorrow, he's starting tomorrow, why don't you guys go ahead and meet each other, and you guys get here tomorrow. And so I shook her hand, and I said, I'm Joe. Would you like to go home with me? And she said, sure. I said, how about we get married? I'll beat the hell out of you, and then you'll have my kid, and we'll never see each other again. And she thought, all right, that sounds like a plan. And I do that just for the fast version, because I'm not going to go into the whole details of this drunkalogue about what happened in that marriage, but that's exactly what happened. We went home together. 3 weeks later, I think 3 or 4 weeks later, we were married. 1 year and 3 hours later, 1 year and 3 hours to the day, we were standing in front of a judge, and she was we had filed for divorce, and we were signing papers, and she was 6 months pregnant. The judge told me in that trial, or that court case, he said, you know that she's petitioned for a relinquishment of parental rights, right? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I told him, I know. But we're going to work things out. And so I signed the papers anyway. She had a little boy, and I've never seen him to this day. I went home in that year. I went home with many, many other little waitresses. Just like I heard described by this young little lady here a little while ago, and what Chris talked about earlier, I'd start drinking. We were just one or two, and before I knew it, I didn't show up for a shift at work the next day. I was with somebody else's. I was with the manager's wife. I was with over here, over there. All the things, and I can't emphasize this enough, because remember, when I was a little kid and I was taking notes, I was never gonna be like that. I was gonna be the best husband. I was gonna be the best husband. I was gonna make more money than everybody. But for some reason or another, I'd come home at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and there she'd be waiting with the sound of silence all around her, saying, where you been? Where you been? Who were you with? What were you doing? Where's the money for the rent? And I'd just get off my back. Just leave me alone. And all in my mind, I'm just thinking, but and I'd wake up in the morning, and she'd have black eyes and bruises just like my mom did. And I started hating myself like I'd never hated myself before. Now, all of a sudden, that performing at this level is starting to expose itself, and you're starting to see what I'm really like down here. And I ended up in a treatment center because one day I called my mom and I said, Mom, I can't just go, I can't do this anymore. And so I ended up in a treatment center, and lo and behold, they take me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And they take me to Alcoholics Anonymous, and they show me the root of all my problems, and they show me all the different things that are going wrong with me. And I go to that meeting, and there's Selma, and there's Jesse. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I wish I were like you people. Now, I didn't say that, but that's exactly what was going on in my mind. I'm 21 years old. I'm not like you people. You guys you drink and you get in trouble, You drink, or you can't stop drinking. All you think about is that drinking, but that's not my problem. My problem is getting my wife back. How am I gonna, me and my son were gonna play ball. I was gonna be the best husband. Let me get her back, and let me get my life back with that little boy, and let me get these finances taken care of, and let me get that shotgun out of Hawk, and let me get that lawnmower out of Hawk, and let me get all these other things squared away, and then we'll talk about not drinking. But right now, I got other real problems. You see, I didn't have a drinking problem. What I had was a drinking solution. Alcohol was the answer to my problems. And what would happen is that I'd come up I'd always just start thinking, if I could just come up with a better plan, if I could just figure out another different way to do this, if I could only come up, I know, I'll get this guy to front me some weed. He'll front me the weed, I'll sell the weed, and then I'll make more money off of it, pay him off, and then get the shotgun out of Hawk, and then my grandpa will never know it was even gone, and everything's gonna be okay. Until I started smoking the weed. Then I had a party, And then we had extra money. Hey, party, man. And now I got more problems because I also got a dealer to deal with now. And it just kept on compounding. And these things, as they compounded, create this kind of what I like to describe as restless, irritable, and discontentedness. And this restless, irritable, and discontentedness, it wells up inside of me. Cuervo, please. We pour a little Cuervo on that. The sense of ease and comfort comes at once. And that sense of ease and comfort would just take care of that problem and everything would be okay again. Well, I get out and I end up in this treatment center and they introduce me to these steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I start going to these meetings and I'm not like you people. And I keep coming here for a little while, and this isn't working for me. And she's not coming back and that's obvious. And I still haven't got the gun out, and I'm trying to stay sober and my license is suspended and the judge is still on my back. And sure enough, I drank again. And so one day, we're at the Blue Moon, and this little girl comes up and grabs my hand. This little Mexican band was playing, and she grabs my hand and says, "Come on, you're Mexican, let's dance." I said, "Hell, let's get married. You have my kid, and I'll beat the hell out of you too, man." And that's exactly what happened. She had my daughter, and I've never seen that little girl to this day. There was a difference in this one, though. By this time, I had been to treatment 2 times. And I go into treatment, and I come back out, and every time I'm going to do it better this time. I'd have a better plan. I'm going to do better this time. And each time I tried to do better, I'd come back out, and I'd set myself with the expectations because I always looked on the outside. If I could only get this judge off my back and get these things, if I could get these trophies all in a line, everything will be okay. And I knew that this time, I knew that this drinking was a problem. Because every time I drank, I'd get in trouble. I hit people. I seemed to, remember her and I were sitting at this bar and this guy smiled at her and I didn't like the way she smiled back. So I hit him with a pool cue, I just thought he needed a straightening up. And that's what always seemed to happen. It always seemed that everything was okay. I start drinking and total reaction again. Over and over and over again. And by this time, I'm just tearing the lives up around me. My mom is no longer, she's at this point where she's saying, I can't watch you come over here and destroy this family anymore. You steal the things from the shed, you take your dad's guns, you take your grandpa's stuff, you just don't come around here anymore. And so by this time, I knew, having been to treatment a couple times, that I had to stop. And so I started taking Antabuse. And that was August of 1986. And I'm taking this Antabuse, and me and wife number 2 are trying to get things together. And I get out of treatment number 3 on the day my daughter is born. I go straight to the hospital because, by George, I'm not going to lose another kid. And I'm going to be a dad this time, and I'm going to be a husband, and I'm going to be the best provider I could be. And I went to her and I told her, look, I'm sober, I'm taking Antabuse now, and I'm never going to drink again. I'm done. So she's, she thought, well, maybe he means it this time. Now I'll say this. One of my favorite paragraphs in the book, I get real kind of frustrated when I've heard people tell other people, if you wanted it bad enough, you'd keep coming. Well, then he's not powerless. If a mere code of morals or better philosophies were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have done it years ago. If you would have hooked me up, I like Chris used that example this afternoon about, if you would have hooked me up to a lie detector machine and asked me, are you gonna drink again? And I would have said no. I would have passed that test. I would have passed that because absolutely the last thought in my mind was to put another drop of alcohol in my body. I saw what I did. And I meant every single bit of it. This time it's going to be different. I'm going to be a better husband. I'm going to be a better dad. I'm going to go to meetings. I'm going to go to more church. I'm going to keep a job, and I'm going to, this time I'm going to do it. And so I'm eating these white pills and I'm going to these meetings and I'm working for $2.35 an hour and having to buy diapers and restless, irritable, discontent. When all of a sudden my higher power whispers in my ear, you're not so bad when you smoke pot. And that was my wife, obviously, telling me that. And so I said, well, you know what? I think you're right. And so I thought I'd try the marijuana maintenance program for a little while. And so now I'm smoking weed, and I'm going and doing this little manual job, for $2.35 an hour. And her and I don't seem to be getting along. It's gone from August. It's Christmas Eve. They're supposed to show up. I bought this little cute dress for my daughter and a little present for her, and they were going to come over, and we're going to, just try to celebrate Christmas together. And she never showed up, and I never saw him again. Restless, irritable, discontent. It just gnawed at me on the inside and gnawed at me at the inside and gnawed at me. And I made it from Christmas Eve to New Year's Eve, 1 week. On New Year's Eve, I sat there and I thought, when suddenly the thought crossed my mind that, like the big book, when suddenly the thought crossed his mind that a shot of whiskey with his milk wouldn't hurt him with his sandwich. When suddenly the thought crossed my mind that one drink on Antabuse won't hurt me. So I, at that time, and then, I don't know if you all remember nowadays, I don't know what size they're up to. They're like 130-ounce drinks, but it was when Circle K's had just come out with the Thirst Buster, remember? And they had that Thirst Buster cup, and I poured a fifth of Tanqueray in there. I squeezed some tonic in there. I squeezed a lime in there. And I poured a little tonic, squeezed a lime in there, and shook it around. And I tell this every time I speak. I don't know why, if it's just for my own deal. I tell you, I have a perception problem that certainly this one drink on Antabuse won't hurt me. So I tipped that drink back. If ever there was a time, some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. The sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks, but this time was with a little bit of a kicker. My heart started to feel like it was going to blow out of my chest, man. My arms, I was like, I call it like the prelude to mushrooms for some of you who know what I'm talking about. That creeping skin, that skin feeling that feels like it's coming off your body, It was like my skin, but it was turning red, and I was watching it, and all of a sudden my heart's starting to jump out of my chest, and my head's pounding, and the next thing I know was like somebody took a 2x4 and smashed me right in the belly, and I just, oh. And I just say this for the convention version of the tape, or for the CD, no orifice was left untouched on my body that day. I was puking, peeing, and pooping in the hallway at a New Year's Eve party. Who's the guy on the floor? I don't know, man, but good, because somebody get him out of here. And I remember laying there, and I remember thinking to myself, oh, God, please stop. And I just remember thinking, I'll never do this again. I swear to you, I'll never. And I would just, oh, please. And it just felt like it just going like a bad acid trip, and it just didn't stop, and I just thought, please stop. And I'm going to tell you right now, I quit taking Antabuse that day. The big book says we have but two alternatives. One is to go to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, or the other is to accept spiritual help. And what I did, I was at the fork in the road. And at that fork in the road, I was at the point where it didn't matter anymore. I was a failure as a father. I was a failure as a husband. I was a failure as a worker. I was a failure as everything I did, I stole to get by on. I did everything I could to get by on was just absolutely was just like this, the tornado it talks about in the big book. I was just like that tornado, man. Everything I touched seemed to just fall apart. My family didn't want anything to do with me. My mom had said, don't come around anymore. By this time, I was living in the back of it. I was living in you all remember those 1971 banana yellow LTD Ford station wagons? You know which one, the ones with the woody panels? That was my house. Crashed on 3 sides. I had to crawl in through one window. Someone was talking about that earlier, swiped on one side. Yeah, I had to crawl in on one side to get in and out of it. And by this time, I'm having to pull the clothes out of the back of that car to smell it, to see what I was going to wear today because, just because it hadn't been washed or anything. And so whatever kind of smelled the least offensive is what I wore that day. And I was becoming exactly like the Hobo Bob. I was exactly like Hobo Bob, and I'd go back to those meetings again, and this time I'm going to do it. This time I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to stop. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go to more meetings. I'm going to do what I need to do, and this time I'm over. And I'd come in, and there'd be Selma, now with yellow hair, and there'd be Jesse, still there, and Ron, and Bob. And Bob, I looked at Bob one day, and there was something different about him. He still had matted hair, but he had new glasses on, no duct tape. I cannot tell you, guys, how profound that sits in my mind today. How did that dude get new glasses? I'm living in the back of my car, and this guy's getting new glasses. My life is spiraling out of control, and he seems to be getting better. I'm Bob, the last of the real hobos, sober by the grace of God. What the hell, man? But I'm not like him. That's an alcoholic. And so I pursued drinking with a vengeance, and I just thought I would just drink until I die, kind of like the movie Leaving Las Vegas. I just 24 years old and just wanted to die. I hated the air I breathed. I hated the people around me. I was this way because of where I was raised. If you were raised where I was, if you were Mexican like me, if you were this, and everything, there was a rationalization, and I believed every single one of my lies, and I defended it to the nth degree. And I'd make myself restless, irritable, and discontent, and then I'd drink again. And by this time, now it's drinking nonstop. I'm going into bars, I'm stealing pitchers off of tables, I'm stealing drinks off of tables, and I'm just doing everything I can do to get drunk at any cost. Well, we Mexicans, we kind of colonized, and my mom lived here, and my grandma lived right next door to her. So I went over to my grandma's house one night, and I hadn't taken a shower, I hadn't bathed in a long, long time, and I went in and I said, Grandma, do you mind if I take a shower? And she said, oh, no, come on in, let me make you some enchiladas, mijo. You can always count on Grandma, And I went in there, and my grandpa was watching a ball game in the other room. Now, I had heroes in my life. You got to understand this. There were heroes in my life, and there was the guys at the bonfire. But when my mom and dad got divorced when I was 10 years old, my grandpa stepped in, and my grandpa took care of me. My grandpa was like Superman. I remember he was a carpenter, and he was hammering a nail, and he hit his thumb, and the hammer flew off. Oh! Well, my grandpa's bad, man. So I go in this room, and he's sitting there, he's watching the ball game. Of course, he's been drinking, and he decides it's time for him to have his talk with me. You know what's wrong with you, man? You just got to be a man. You just need to go to work. You need to do the right thing. And he's drunk when he's telling me this, And I know today that my grandpa was trying to say, I love you, mijo, man, but you're going to have to do some things different, dude. Your life is just a mess. And everything you do keeps falling apart right in front of you. And you got to grow up. And I'm saying, oh my God, Grandpa, don't you think and so of course I defend and I argue. And the next thing you know, he stands up and I stand up and we bump into each other. And so he decides to tell me, he says, you know what you need, man? You need a part of me, man. I'm like, Grandpa, I'm not going to fight you, man. No, yeah, I'll show you, man. I'll show you, because that's what macho men do. They kick your ass, So he's going to kick my ass into being a sober guy or whatever. And I'm telling my Grandpa, I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to fight you. And so I'm getting ready I'm walking outside, and he's following me. My grandma comes up in between, and he somehow or another, he hits her. She falls down. He cut her eye when she fell, and I went off. And I beat on him, until by the grace of God, somebody pulled me off, and I almost killed him. I kicked his ribs. I broke his ribs. I kicked his face in. His lip was hanging down. His eyes were completely shut. The only man in my life who I had even a shred of any little bit of respect lays on the floor in front of me, bleeding. And I thought to myself, this is what life is all about, man. I might as well not. It's not even about being drunk anymore. I just wish I were dead. And so my parents, my grandma and grandpa lived right by a hotel, and met with this guy. We went on this drug deal. I stole some money from him. To make a long story short, I ended up back in that motel right next to my mom and dad's house. I went over and took one of my dad's guns. I went back to that motel room, and I thought, this is it. I'm going to die. And I called my mom, and I said, Mom, I'm done. I'm done. I'm never going to do this anymore. I just can't keep on going like this. And after tonight, you don't have to worry. So she's freaking out. No, don't cry. Please, no, don't stop. Don't do anything stupid. Where are you? Let us come get you. We'll take you to treatment again. You know, I don't want to go to treatment again. What, are you going to take me to those meetings with Selma and Bob? Work the steps? I'm not like those people. I'm different. I have deep-rooted problems. You don't understand. And I believed into my core that I was a social, psychological, psychiatric misfit. I was a sociopath who didn't belong on this planet. And the best thing to do with somebody like me was to exterminate me. And I was going to do my own extermination that night. And for whatever reason, I cannot tell you. What happened is that I was sitting in that room. I'd stolen all this money from this guy, and I'm sitting there, and I got a case of beer, and I've got this weed, and I've got this tequila, and I'm sitting there drinking, and I'm sitting drinking, smoking, drinking, and I know that I was as physically drunk as Cooter Brown. Now, I've been in Alabama long enough to know who Cooter Brown is, so I was drunk, but the drunker I got, the more clear my head got. I don't know if some of you know that spot, but that's a scary place. You see, alcohol had always worked before, but this night it didn't work. The monkeys weren't going away. The demons weren't going away. It just kept on getting louder and louder, and everything in my head just seemed to be falling in around me. When all of a sudden, Patty Parks was a counselor at my first treatment center. Her head starts floating around the room. Jails, institutions, and death. Oh my! Jails, institutions, and death. Oh my! Jails, institutions. Now that's a little funny now, but it weren't that night, I promise you. And for the first time in my life, I realized they weren't talking about the jails that I was locked up in and all the different times I've been arrested. They were talking about the jail I lived in right here. And they weren't talking about the institutions that I'd been in and out of, but the institution that says I'm this way because I'm different. And they weren't talking about the death like me wrapping myself around some oak tree on the way home from a bar one night in that old wagon. They were talking about the death I was living one day at a time. And for whatever reason, I cannot tell you, other than what I just truly believe is a miracle, is just the greatest miracle of all, is that I threw my hands in the air and I said, God, if you're real, help me, please. And I've been sober from that moment until this one right now. 28 years. It says, you've heard a lot of times that when the student's ready, the teachers appear. And what ended up happening is I ended up in treatment again, and I got out of treatment, and by this time I didn't care anymore. It wasn't about getting the wife back. It wasn't about getting the car back. It wasn't about getting the gun out of Hawk. It wasn't about any of those things. It was just trying to just stay out of my head as much as I could. You know, just really, I don't even know what it was. I was just existing from one day to the next. And they told me what I'd heard in the 4 treatment centers before that. You know, get a sponsor, go to meetings, all that stuff. I walked into the Arid Club, and Ken Shorley was standing behind the desk. Ken was this big, tall, he was Jewish and beautiful white, silver hair. I've been sober at that time by 27, 28 years. And I said, Ken, will you be my sponsor? And he looked at me, he said, hell no, man. He said, man, I've been watching you in and out of here for the last 5 years crying about your little wives and all that stuff. He said, that's a pleasure somebody else could have, Joe. I'm sorry. And I told him, I said, Ken, I'll do anything you tell me. I'll do anything you tell me. And he looked down, you know, and I'll never forget this. You know what I'm talking about, that when that guy comes up to you and asks you, and you're like, oh my God, anybody but him, man. I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. And he's like, he looked down and he looked back up at me and he said, the day you don't, you call me with the name of your new sponsor. And I said, I'll do whatever you tell me. So Ken, then what he did is he said, Joe, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get sober with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he opened it to the very first page of the forward to the first edition. And he showed me that very first paragraph. And he showed me that paragraph, and it says, we are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly helpless, hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And he said, and we're going to do it precisely like the book says. Any more would be my ego. Any less will steal from the people who will follow you in Alcoholics Anonymous later down the road. He said, so we're going to do it exactly like the book says. So I say this, and I say this rather arrogantly. If you have a sponsor who does not use this book, you have a self-appointed psychotherapist who can't run their own life and lives vicariously, happily trying to manage your life. And I say that today with a lot more confidence than I did before, once upon a time. But, I've been here for a little while, and I kind of get real tired of the things I hear in meetings nowadays, And I don't mean this in any disrespect. I promise you I don't. But all of a sudden, it's kind of like that little game that we play. Remember in kindergarten, you play telephone? I whisper in your ear, and I tell you the secret, and then it goes around the room. By the time it gets around the other side of the room, it's totally a different saying. Well, that's exactly what I believe is happening in Alcoholics Anonymous. We got people who are telling people to do something in Alcoholics Anonymous that's nowhere near what the book says. And as a result of it, we're wondering why people can't stay sober. Well, you know what? The book is the way. It says precisely have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And that's what Ken showed me. He said, the first thing I want you to do, and I say this because I don't mean it in any disrespect, but people think nighty and night he's going to keep you sober. No, it's not. What Ken told me is go to meetings, don't drink in between. Now, what's the difference in that? You see, I thought, because I tried this recipe many, many times, that I'd go to a meeting, pull out, be as restless, irritable, as discontent as I was when I went in, drive through the drive. We had drive-through liquor bars in New Mexico. Drive through the drive-through, pick up a case, be upside down in my car the next morning and not know how I got there, right from a meeting last night. But he said, I want you to go to meetings and not drink in between. And I didn't know if I could go from 8 a.m. until 5:30 that evening, so I went at 8 a.m. and then I'd go back at noon. And then I go from noon to 5:30, and then from 5:30 to 8 p.m., and 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And on the weekends, we had 10 p.m. meetings and 12 and midnight meetings. For 1 year straight, I went to a meeting, at least 3 meetings a day for 1 year in a row. I'm not saying that because I want a pat on the back, but I didn't know if I could go from one meeting to the next without not taking a drink. Anyway, that's an aside. What happened is I got out of that treatment on Sunday. I went to a meeting the next day. I went to the Monday night men's stag meeting. I went into the Monday night men's stag meeting, and the men were all sitting in kind of like in a horseshoe. And the guy that was chairing the meeting was about 2 or 3 chairs down from me. And he starts the topic, and the topic of the meeting that day is hitting bottom. So he says, we're going to talk about hitting bottom today, and so it's coming in my direction, and I'm going to talk next, and I'm, whoo, baby. You all sit down and get ready, because I'm going to tell you what hitting bottom really looks like. 28 days ago, I had a gun in my mouth. 29 days ago, I had a gun in my mouth ready to pull the trigger for the things I'm getting ready to brag about right now. I'd just gotten out of treatment, and now it comes over to me, and I'm sitting there, and it's, oh, my wife this, and my first wife that, and all of this, and blah, 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 and getting arrested, and my mom kicked me out, and oh, my grandpa, when all of a sudden this little Mexican wino gets up from the other side of the room. He starts charging at me. He reaches up in his head, he pulls his glass eye out of his head, and he's holding this eyeball in my face. He says, shut up, shut up, shut up, you little boy. He says, you know nothing about hitting bottom. And he's this eyeball sitting here looking at me, and I'm sitting here looking at this eye, I'm thinking, oh my God. And I could feel myself pulling cotton out of my ears and stuffing it in my mouth, man. And I thought, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. He says, 28 years I spent on Skid Row. 28 years I live in dumpsters. I'd travel from city to city. He says, I've been in more dumpsters than you can even count in your lifetime. He said, and you come in here, you talk about your little girlfriend. Shut up, you little boy. Yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. That guy's name was Roger. And we called him One-Eyed Roger, needless to say. And he became a really, really good friend of me. And Ken started me through the Big Book, and he started taking me through, and he showed me that we drink because we sent, and he told me about my perception, and he said how my perception up, and that he asked me then, he said, why don't you explain to me what you think powerlessness is? He said, are you powerless over alcohol? I said, oh man, got that one down. Remember the Annabue story? Oh. He said, yeah. I said, man, once I drink, I can't stop. You know, I don't know what, I can't, I'm alcoholic to the extent that once I start drinking, I can no longer guarantee my actions. One of my favorite descriptions of alcoholism, or being powerless over alcohol. He said, that's good. He said, what about unmanageable? Oh, man, unmanageable. I'm unmanageable. Oh, I owe this for the shotgun and I can't get the lawnmower out. No, the judge and my licensor is telling me I'll never drive again, you know, and I had all this whole list and the people that I owed for the rent and that car that I wrecked and blah, 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 and all this. He said, everything that you just described is an external circumstance. Every single thing that you just described is an external circumstance. He said, but if you look at the step, Joe, he said, I want you to look at something. And he said, we admitted we're powerless over alcohol. He said, then what comes next? I said, that our lives have become unmanageable. He said, no, what comes next? Well, that our lives, no. He said, is that a period after alcohol? Well, no. Is that a comma? No. Is that a parenthesis? No. Is it a question mark? No. Exclamation? Nope. What is it? I said, it's a hyphen. He said, and what does a hyphen do grammatically? He said, a hyphen connects. He said, you're powerless over your unmanageable life. You see, you've always looked at everything as if the external, when you get everything on the outside squared away, then you're going to be okay. He said, but the unmanageability in your life has nothing to do with the external things. He says, you measure the external things in your life by how you feel on the inside. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. But I had spent my whole time trying to straighten out mental and physical, and I couldn't do it. And as a result, I was always trying to get, once I got all these things, when I got my wife back, when I got the dog back, when I got the money back, when I got this back, when I paid the dealer back, but then it'll be okay. You see, my favorite sentence in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, is he not the victim of the delusion that he can wrest happiness and satisfaction out of this world if only he manages well? I was the victim of a delusion that when I squared away everything on the outside, I would feel okay on the inside. But I have a perception problem. And because I have a perception problem, I justify and rationalize my feelings. And when I justify and rationalize my feelings, I defend those things. And when I defend those things, I drink. What? You see, I used to think that, and I hear it said a lot, that my life is unmanageable because of alcohol. It's really the other way around. I'm not alcoholic because alcohol made my life unmanageable. I'm alcoholic because I drink because of the unmanageability of my life. And that hyphen tied that together for me for the first time. I'll give you a better example. My wife and I have been married now. If we make it to April 8th, we'll have been married 26 years together. And I'm happy to tell you I've never laid a hand on her. And we have got 3 beautiful daughters, 8 grandchildren now. And wow, can't even begin to go. I'd need 3 or 4 hours to talk about the blessings that I've been received. But we came home one day, and this was about that time I was a little bit of restless, irritable, and discontent prior to me seeing that little boy in that wagon. And I would come home, we would come home from work in the afternoon and walk in, and teenage girls, being what they are, would be sitting there watching TV, with a remote, and corn growing off our furniture, dishes piled up in their sink, the vacuum hadn't been done and God only knows how long. And I'd walk in and it would just once again rise up inside of me, restless, irritable. Damn, Clara, can't they just clean the house? And all my thoughts were, if I could just get these girls to act right, then everything with our household will be great. But I couldn't get them to do it no matter what. And every single day we'd walk home and it'd be mad again and mad again and mad again. Then one day, being the genius that I am, I came up with an ingenious plan. And my plan was to put the chores I'd write the chores on a piece of paper and put them all in a hat, and then everybody would pick their chore, and we would, go about doing our chores. So we've got Jennifer got dishes, and Gloria got the dusting, and Carla got the vacuuming, and Clara was doing laundry, I think, and I was just being the symphony conductor. Da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, Jennifer's washing dishes now. And I'm just sitting here watching my orchestra, da-da-da-da-da. When all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see Carla over here vacuuming. No rhyme, no reason, every single different direction, back and forth, over to the side. And I stopped and I said, Carla, you're not vacuuming right. I said, you got to vacuum in lines. Straight up and down, then move the vacuum over so that you can make lines in the carpet when you're done. And then you got to crisscross it, going the other way. And she looked at me and she said, Joe, for you it'll never be right. And you know what? She's right. I'm the victim of the delusion that I'll be happy when I manage well. She would have started north and south, and I would have said, you got to start east and west. Nothing good enough is never enough. In my mind, I've got this idea. Well, do you all remember that cartoon? There used to be this cartoon of a donkey pulling a little buggy, and they're trying to get the donkey to go, but the donkey's just fighting and resisting and resisting. So somebody comes up with this idea to put a carrot in front of that donkey. And they take that carrot. They take that carrot, and they want him to go to the right. They just move that stick over to the right, and so he'll follow that carrot wherever he needs to go. They need him to go to the left. He moves it to the left. He starts following it to the left. Well, I'm a lot like that donkey. I've got this idea that as soon as I get the carrot, I'll be happy. And when I'm happy, then everybody's going to be happy, of course. So as soon as I get the carrot, then I'll be happy. There's just a little bit of a difference between me and the donkey. I hold my own stick. Think about that, people. I'll let myself get that close, and then I'll move the stick again. I'll let it get closer, and then I'll move it again. Enough is never enough. I want more, more, more. And when I don't get more, it's your fault, and it's your fault, and it's your fault. And I react, and I become selfish and self-centered because that's how I defend myself. They're not derogatory terms. They're arts of survival. And what ended up happening for me is that I chased this carrot, and I could never catch it. I have another little example, just a side example. I had been sober, a number of years. It really doesn't matter. But by this time, I had done amends and make the steps and blah, 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 and had a good job and had credit and my license. So I went into the GMC dealer and I bought their S15 or the S10 pickup. And I buy this truck, and it's brand new. It's got like 4 miles on it, full tank of gas, CD radio, power windows, V6 engine. I'm like, man, God, you're so good. Alcoholics Anonymous has blessed me beyond understanding. God, I can't believe it, man. Look at this. And I'm just like crying. So I pull out of the dealership. I come up to the light, And I'm sitting here looking at my truck when I look in the mirror, and all of a sudden this big black 4-wheel drive with big old wheels this big pulls up right next to me. This guy's sitting there, and he's got this hot little blondie sitting right next to him, and I'm sitting in my little tiny truck looking at him thinking, man, if I had that truck, I'd be happy, because enough is never enough. I'm always looking for something greener on the other side of the hill. And as soon as I get it, then I'm going to be happy. And that's what causes this restless, irritable, and discontentedness. That's what that unmanageability is. I'm not just powerless, but I'm powerless over the unmanageability in my life. And one of the things that Ken did for me then is he said, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to come up with this idea of what you think a higher power is. And he took a piece of paper and he said, write down what do you think God is. So I kind of wrote on the piece of paper, God is, and I wrote unconditional love. And then he said, well, write on the other side what you think God is not. So I wrote on the other side, I had a list of what I didn't think God was. He certainly wasn't the priest who yelled at me for ringing the bells at the wrong time, and he wasn't the pope, and he wasn't this, and he wasn't that, and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm just writing all this stuff down. So I handed it to Ken. Ken took the piece of paper, never even looked at it. This just freaks me out. He never even looked at it. He took the piece of paper, he ripped it, he wadded up the God is not part, he threw it in the trash, and he said, now make a decision to turn your life and will and care over to the God that you understand. This AA. He took the fight out. You see, I couldn't fight with you. I couldn't argue with you about whether Jesus was right or Buddha was. It was my understanding. It was my interpretation of a power greater than myself. Now there's no argument. It took all the fight out. It's either you make a decision to turn your life and will over to the care of God, or you don't. So now I want to step back for just one brief little second, and I want to talk about what I think is the most important thing that ever happened. It says in this book that we are 100 men and women, like I said before, who have recovered from a seemingly helpless, hopeless state of mind and body. And this was brought together by a proctologist and a stockbroker. And I was, that's kind of like the plumber and the baker got together and they're going to write a book about recovery, and they're going to change millions of people's lives. The grocery store manager and the mechanic come together and write. The hairdresser and the nail tech got together. I don't know about you, but I got to believe that this book was put together by divine inspiration. You cannot tell me that the words that were written on pages 60 through 64 are not divinely inspired. You cannot tell me that the promises of this book are not divinely inspired. You cannot tell me that the third step prayer, which is the most selfish, think about it. I don't know if you guys, that third step prayer, when you look at it, is the most selfless set of words I've ever seen put together of any kind. They're not asking for anything in particular. They're saying, of your will, God, of your will, God. And Ken showed me that, and he said, and this is what you're making a decision to turn your life and will over to the care of, Joe. Not Bill and Bob, not me. No human power could have relieved our alcoholism. We put a lot of stock and faith in sponsors, and I'm not knocking sponsorship. But no sponsor's going to keep me sober. No meeting's going to keep me sober. To find a power greater than ourselves is exactly what this book is about. It says that on page 55, I believe it is. So Ken showed me that, and he said, now what I want you to do, he said, how do I know you're doing the third step? He said, by doing the fourth step. Unless at once followed by strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things that have been blocking us, we may not overcome drinking. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome. So he had me start on the fourth step. And he said, I want you to be thinking about who you're going to do your fifth step with. And I said, well, I already know. And I said, and no offense to you, but I want to do it with Roger. And he said, yeah, that'll be fine. He said, I think that's a perfect choice. And so I got through the fourth step, and me and Roger set an appointment, and I went over to Roger's house. And Roger lived in this little one-room, efficiency apartment. he said, come in. He says, let's go ahead and get started. And he's sitting at this table, and he's got a Big Chief tablet and a Husky pencil. And he says, what are we going to do? And I opened the book, and I showed him, I'm supposed to tell you all my life story, exactly how it is, no nook and cranny, blah, blah, blah. He said, that's good. He says, let's get started. So I started. When I started with this resentment, what the cause was, what it affected, and he said, well, where's the fourth column? I said, what fourth column? He said, right here, the fourth column. The book said, draw another line right there. He said, write that fourth column, and then right at the top of the page, he said, I want you to write my faults. My faults. He said, yeah, right here in the book. You see, now we look at it from an entirely different angle. Where were we at fault? Where were we dishonest, self-seeking, and self-serving, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, I guess I missed that, I said. He said, okay, it's all right, no problem. He said, go ahead and write it down right there. And so I went through, and so we talked about it. He said, what's the resentment? I told him. He said, what's the cause? I told him what did it affect. I told him, and he said, now, were you at fault? And it felt like I must have sat there for an hour and a half with no words coming out of my mouth because I could not figure out where I was at fault. I was a young kid. I didn't do anything, And so he said, well, how old were you? And I said, well, I was 5. I was about 5 or 6 years old. And he said, and how old are you now? And I said, I'm 25. He said, so for 20 years, you've been using it as an excuse, making excuses for your life, and you got no faults. Oh, wow, yeah, I never looked at it that way. Ego. He says, that's your ego. And he writes on that Big Chief tablet, I-G-O. Ego. That's your ego. And I looked and I said, Roger, I don't think you spelled it like that. He said, that doesn't matter. He says, your ego. He said, what's the next one? And so I went down and boom, one right after the other. Ego, that's your ego. And he kept on pointing at that word on that paper, and that's your ego. He says, if you have a tree, if you have a pecan and you grow it in the ground, what does it grow? I said, pecans? He said, that's right, that's good. He says, if you take a peach and you put a peach in the ground, what does it grow? I said, peaches? He said, that's right, that's good. He says, the root of your trouble, Joe, is selfishness and self-centeredness. That's your ego. Your ego. He said, and the fruit you bear is selfish and self-centered. I said, wow. So we went through this whole thing, and I'm going through it, and finally we finished, and he says, he gets up and he walks across this little tiny apartment. I'm talking about a little room about as big as this. Walks over there. He turns the light off, and there's a chair, a little table, a lamp, plant, and he starts walking back towards me, and he knocks over everything. He knocks over the lamp, and the table, and the chair fall over, and all this other stuff. I said, Roger, what you doing? He says, I can't see nothing. It's dark in here. I said, well, Roger, you only got one eye. He says, I know it. I can't see nothing in the dark. And so he walked over to me, and then he walked back over to the light switch. He turned the light switch back on, and he says, but in the light, I can go everywhere. And he walked around, and he picked up the lamp, and he picked up the chair, and he picked up the plant, and he picked up everything. He says, you see, I can go anywhere in the light. And he walked back over to the light switch one more time, and he cut the lights off again. And he said, Joe, do you know what the hardest thing in the world to do for an alcoholic is? And I said, no. He said, to do nothing and wait on the light. He said, you see, you've been blinded by your own darkness. You live in the darkness of your own ego. You rationalize and justify yourself and everything about you because you look at it from a self-centered perspective, he said, and everything you do is selfish and self-centered. And because you don't know how to live, you react to everything. And because you live in the darkness, you can't see nothing. But he said, but deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God, obscured by calamity, pomp, and worship of other things. And he said, and the hardest thing for an alcoholic to do is to do nothing, be powerless, and wait on the light. And he said that from across that room. And in the time that he said that, the flashing VCR lit up the room enough for him to quietly walk around the plant, walk around the table, over to the lamp, and then he said, and it will always lead you to the brighter light. And he clicked the lamp on. And he said, and then you live in the light. He says, you've been blinded by your own ego and the things that you defend. And I was like, oh my God. He says, what did you learn? I said, man, I'm an egomaniac. I'm self-centered. My God, man.